power infrastructure projects throughout Australia with upstream and downstream applications, as well as being an Australian qualified lawyer. And the subject of her presentation is envisaging a hydrogen hub. Welcome, Alana.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to get the technology work and hopefully share my screen, and hopefully we can see some slides shortly. Now I will say, please don't hold against me the fact that I was a lawyer. I was misguided in my youth and have since chosen a more noble career path in the hydrogen industry. Look, thank you very much for having me today. I'm delighted to be talking to you about hydrogen hubs, and one in particular in Gladstone, Australia. Today I'll talk a little bit about Sumitomo Corporation and who we are, so why we're relevant to the hydrogen piece, and then I will talk definitely a lot about Gladstone, Australia's best hydrogen hub. Now, very quickly, Sumitomo's credentials. If you don't know who we are a diversified Japanese trading and investment house headquartered in Tokyo, with a lovely big long list of credentials. Fortune 500 company for over 25 years, 75,000 people worldwide we employ, a significant asset base, over $90 billion AUD, and a business history going back more than 400 years. Now, if you do want to know a little bit more about Sumitomo Corporation, I suggest you have a look at our website. There's plenty of information for you to take a look at, and you'll probably see that we play in a lot of different fields. But Sumitomo is actually very active in developing the hydrogen industry globally. We look at our role as facilitating production and local consumption, large-scale value chains, emerging technologies, and otherwise. Sumitomo is definitely one of the leading players in the hydrogen game globally. There may be a few projects on the slide that might pique your interest. I can tell you we have a lot going on globally, but I'm only looking at Australia, and I look after the HES project and the Gladstone project and some other projects that aren't publicly announced yet. So I'll keep those under my hat. But the Gladstone project is very close to my heart. So as I said, I'm very pleased to be talking to you today. Now, Gladstone, earmarked as one of Australia's best locations for a hydrogen hub. We've been working there for quite a few years on a number of different hydrogen projects. So why don't I tell you why Gladstone as a hydrogen hub? Hydrogen hubs are locations where multiple organisations can collaborate on hydrogen production, distribution, export, and/or utilisation. It is essential to be in a position to co-locate some of those resources and offtake opportunities in order to gain cost efficiencies. Now, a little bit about the region. Located in Queensland on Australia's east coast, Gladstone is an industrial community with a long history of fossil fuel exports, coal and gas, alumina processing and smelting, bunker fueling, cement production, fertiliser, explosive manufacturing, and it also has Australia's best deep water port with significant room to expand. Combine this with brilliant solar radiance and great wind, Gladstone is a wonderful place for hydrogen production and export. And Sumitomo has already got into existing investments in the region, which is why building a hydrogen ecosystem or a hub in Gladstone is an absolutely perfect fit for us. Now, Sumitomo's strategic approach to developing a hydrogen industry in Gladstone is to facilitate the value chain, focus on offtake and production. In that strategy, 3 stages emerge: envision, demonstrate, and scale up and collaborate. To envision, we recognise that developing a new hydrogen industry was about more than building infrastructure. Building infrastructure is the easy part. Building production facilities, pipelines, export infrastructure, distribution. I know they say they're easy, but there are harder things to achieve in getting a lot of people to work together. The hard part is working with community to develop a vision of a hydrogen ecosystem within a net zero world. Now that takes some real work. So in Gladstone, we engage with the community, industry, and government stakeholders to envision a hydrogen ecosystem or hub, and understanding the prosperity that a net zero industry could bring to the region. Now, the study was conducted by Arup, which is an incidental plug here. It's not why I've been asked to come and join us, I believe. But Arup, Australia team looked at this, as well as IDEO, who are a wonderful design house with a global presence. Now, they looked at a vision with the community, as well as the work to implement a hydrogen ecosystem of infrastructure. Now, out of that study, a few things really stood out here for us. First one, because of all the co-located industry, Gladstone is a wonderful place for collaboration on common user infrastructure, such as shared hydrogen pipelines, transmission, desalination, port infrastructure, and otherwise. But the second thing that stood out is that Gladstone already lacks significantly in the livability factors: lack of childcare, ill-equipped medical services, lack of affordable housing, lack of many amenities that most of us in metropolitan areas really take for granted. So the study looked at how a hydrogen industry could add value to those areas lacking by looking at the potential in 6 key areas: education and research, regional partnerships, business and innovation, industry and jobs, healthcare and retirement, noting there are no retirement facilities in Gladstone whatsoever, and recreation and innovation. Now, sadly, I don't have time to run you through each of those concepts and where we got to, but I can say that we did develop a vision statement with the community, which has their hopes for the coming transition to clean energy and a net zero 2050 goal. Now, envisioning a hydrogen hub is about decarbonisation and the prosperity that can be shared amongst the community. And to finish, I'd like to share with you the vision statement that we did co-create with the community. This is from the mums and dads, the workers and governments, the future leaders who currently occupy their schools and universities. And this is what they see the potential of being a hydrogen hub as being. So what comes to mind when you think of Gladstone? A thin layer of coal dust over your car in the morning? Now, these are some actual postcards of Gladstone from a few decades ago, I believe the 80s. So this is what the world was seeing of Gladstone, not so long ago. Now, do you think about smokestacks in the distance, perhaps? Colourful plant by the port. I mean, look at this. Who doesn't want to go and visit Gladstone and think of it as a clean society and a hydrogen hub? Throughout the multiple boom-bust cycles, Gladstone has built a reputation as a reliable and productive industrial town. And these cycles have taught us important lessons. Lessons like the importance of building on what came before, and the importance of bringing everyone along. As the world looks to shift away from fossil fuels to adopt cleaner energy, Gladstone is ready to reinvent itself and rise to the challenge better than before, creating a sustainable economy that ends the boom-bust cycle for good. And Gladstone already holds all the skills, experience, and geographical advantages necessary to define the future. A future as a clean energy economy that benefits all of its citizens. A future where Gladstone leads Australia towards carbon neutral. Making Gladstone the heart of a resilient region means more than just exporting materials. It means considering every aspect of this new energy ecosystem. People with jobs that unlock new opportunities. A city that sparks energy, excitement, and pleasant surprises. Businesses that innovate and inspire new technologies. Gladstonites who proudly make this place their permanent home. And a Queensland where regions build on the strengths of one another. And a world that knows Gladstone cares about the environment, and a world that says, if it comes from Gladstone, it must be green. Welcome to Gladstone, the green capital of Australia, a pioneer that shares climate positive prosperity with every citizen and inspires the world to follow. Now that's the end of my slides and the end of the vision statement, but the approach that Sumitomo has taken is to look at more than just the physical assets and physical necessity of building a hydrogen ecosystem. It's about supporting the community and taking a different approach and keeping those concerns at the forefront when trying to deliver a hydrogen hub. Now, I hope that's given you a little bit of food for thought, and I'm sorry if you can hear my baby screaming in the background. But I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit more about this later on if there's time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alana. Excellent. Yes, I should have mentioned that the Q&A, panel discussion Q&A, will follow all of the presenters after everyone has presented their presentation. We're taking questions on the Q&A feature of the Zoom webinar. You'll notice at the bottom of your screen there's a Q&A icon. Please put your questions there. If you're in the room at Arup in Hong Kong, Nicolas de Loisy is taking the questions from the room and putting them into the Q&A. So that's the route for putting questions in. So that moves us to our next speaker, Mr. Joe Seifert, who is the CEO of Vertex Hydrogen. Joe is involved in a low carbon hydrogen production hub in the UK. Joe has 20 years of experience across strategy, capital raising, and executive leadership, including a client executive at JP Morgan Investment Bank and chief investment officer of a $17 billion fund of energy mining infrastructure and industrial assets. And Joe's going to talk to us about that UK hydrogen hub in the northwest of the UK. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me clearly. Greetings from a very sunny day in the United Kingdom, which is something we haven't been able to say much recently. I'm just going to share a short presentation and really walk you through, hopefully people can see that, really a bit about what the UK is doing in terms of hydrogen and what we're doing as part of that for Vertex. So Vertex is the UK's #1 low carbon hydrogen production company. Our vision, which really is very in line with the UK government's vision, hydrogen is going to be a big part of the UK energy market, but it's very important to note that's going to be initially for industrial customers. So whilst there's lots of discussions about where hydrogen may be used in transport and shipping and homes, really the UK economy has some industry left. It's clustered in certain locations. And really what we're doing is replacing natural gas, which is the main use source of energy for big industrial companies, with low carbon hydrogen. And on the right, I sort of allude to the UK government strategy. And the government strategy in the UK for energy is really about electrification. Offshore wind and nuclear is the main part of the strategy. But for heavy industry, so people that make glass and chemicals, you cannot electrify those businesses. So the UK's enacted legislation for net zero. So by law, the government has to deliver that. And in the northwest where we're based, it's a very large industrial base. About 350,000 people are employed in manufacturing. Either they decarbonize through hydrogen or the plants get shut down, because you can't make glass or the chemicals and certain other industries you can't do it with electricity. So low carbon hydrogen is the key. Maybe just to add, the government policy on hydrogen is very advanced in the UK. So we expect to be the first cluster in action for hydrogen anywhere in the world. It's built around slightly different principles. In the UK, it's been built about both blue and green hydrogen. So the government regulatory framework in the UK just says, I don't care about the color. What I care about is how much CO2 is produced for every unit of hydrogen. And if you're below that threshold, you can call it blue, green, whatever the hell you want, but you will qualify for the low carbon hydrogen standard. And there's a subsidy regime in the UK, which is very similar to the offshore wind developed in the UK. And the UK is quite proud. I know it's been on vacation, and the UK will know that when you get to the coast, it's pretty much always an icy wind is blowing. So the UK has the second largest offshore wind business in the world and the largest individual farm, second only to China. And that was done through a government revenue support mechanic. which is really important as we think about how the cluster works. But back to Vertex for a minute. So Vertex is, within that, we are one of the leading projects. And to give you a sense, the initial project selected by government, which will be the first in the UK, and in some ways, in many areas, the first in the world. There are 2 blue hydrogen projects that have qualified. BP on the northeast coast on one of the clusters, and ourselves, Vertex, in the northwest. And those 2 areas were chosen as the initial hydrogen clusters, really for a couple of reasons. The first is they have an offshore end-of-life gas fields where the CO2 can be stored for blue hydrogen. And the second is they have loads of industrial emitters there. And so they're highly polluting areas with a big concentration of industry. So it makes sense to build the infrastructure of hydrogen pipelines and storage, etc., around these core areas. So we're about 30% of the initial UK market. There are some green hydrogen plants in the UK. I would say they are very, very small. And we have plans to do them as ourselves. But to give you a sense, well, the entire supported green hydrogen projects are 250 megawatts. And you see on this page that the just 2 individual blue projects are 3 or 4 times the size. And the reason is really there's lack of grid infrastructure to make green practical. The green hydrogen is far more expensive than the blue hydrogen by multiple factors. And so really the view is in the UK that blue hydrogen will enable the infrastructure. You can do large scale cost effectively to start reducing the CO2 emissions dramatically. And you'll start with some small green projects. And over time, and this is a debate whether this is years or decades, that those blue bars will slowly be replaced and upgraded to green bars. But the blue projects give you the scale. So the biggest green hydrogen project in our region is 30 megawatts. You cannot build a cluster and ecosystem based on that. Bigger picture, we think there's 4 gigawatts of demand in the region. That's from big industrial companies is the biggest piece of that. We have gas-fired power stations locally, which is another big source of demand. And then we've got blending to the national grid, which is waiting a decision from government to approve. But for us, so we think we can do 4 gigawatts ourselves in the region, but we will be the first large plant starting at the 350 megawatt size. Maybe just a couple of other quick points. This map here is the cluster. This is already a government-approved, mapped-out hydrogen cluster. The slightly cheesy heart in the middle is where our Vertex plant is located. And that's located at the site of a major refinery. It used to be a Shell refinery. Supplies nearly 20% of road fuel in the UK. So it's a big industrial regulated site that already produces grey hydrogen. So a very natural place to build hydrogen production. Just on the top left, you see the CO2 storage. That's owned by the Italian energy giant Eni. That's an end-of-life offshore gas field where the CO2 will be stored. It's already connected to the mainland. And then from our production plant, you can see these branches. So Cadent, which is a Macquarie-owned business, is building out the hydrogen pipeline. It's building it in a couple of phases, but it will take the hydrogen we produce to major industrial plants in the region. And maybe the last part of the hydrogen infrastructure, we are blessed locally with phenomenal salt caverns, which today store huge quantities of natural gas, which are perfect places to store very large volumes of hydrogen. So the cluster is really based around hydrogen production, CO2 storage, large industrial customers, and then the pipelines and the storage, which are vital to make sure this is a cluster and an ecosystem rather than a single plant. Maybe I'll just finish on this slide, just as a sense of the kind of companies that are really looking to use hydrogen. So on the top left is a company called NSEC that probably no one will have heard of. They make container glass. Glass is carbon intensive. You cannot electrify it, but it's a very good material. It's recyclable endlessly, and it is heavily recycled. And that goes into, for Johnny Walker, Smirnoff, all the glass bottles that people may have at home. So they do 40% of the UK's, they are looking to replace their gas, which is their principal source of energy, with low carbon hydrogen. They are over the fence from us. Under the government strategy, they will be able to buy hydrogen from us at the same price as natural gas. So essentially, this really supports rapid decarbonisation. And on the right-hand side, you'll see another set of names, from chemicals to other forms of glass manufacturers to aluminium recycling businesses. So this entire area, all the large industrial customers as the initial wave, will be allowed to fuel switch from natural gas to low carbon hydrogen. And maybe just to give a sense of what that looks like, finally, it's about £1 billion investment between our two first plants, so 400 for the first plant, about 600 for the second. The project's starting this year, and first production will be 2027. And in total, we'll be taking the equivalent of nearly 1 million cars off the road in the first instance. So very exciting for us. UK, actually the northwest of the UK, was one of the initial pioneers of the Industrial Revolution. It's probably going to be the first large-scale hydrogen cluster in the world in operation, in conjunction with government support and our partners. And we are extremely proud to be the critical hydrogen production plant at the heart of that. So with that, I'll pause, stop, and happy to take questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. Very interesting presentation. We're going to switch the order now. Next speaker is Thomas Briault. He's a principal of the South Asian Energy Leader of Arup, based in Singapore. So Thomas leads Arup's energy business in Southeast Asia, and also the broader energy, water and resources business in Singapore. And Thomas is going to talk to us about hydrogen demand hubs. Thomas, by the way, is the chairman of the IPPF Hydrogen Committee, as you heard earlier. Welcome, Thomas. Thomas, are you muted?
Yes, I must unmute myself. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent, good. Okay. Good evening, everyone, or good morning, wherever you are in the world. And thanks again to our speakers who have spoken so far. Really very interesting presentation. So what I wanted to talk about is about hydrogen demand hubs and where those hubs might be and where they might be created. And what is it that a hydrogen hub, hydrogen demand hub needs, as opposed to a hydrogen production hub. So we've already heard a little bit about Arup, nearly 20,000 staff. We have 89 offices around the world, and across APAC we have some 5,500 staff, and we work across a wide variety of the energy sectors, one of which is hydrogen, and we provide a variety of different services, from energy strategy to energy technical due diligence, and then design services going in all the way through the supply chain. I've worked on a number of different hydrogen hub projects around the world. The biggest, I guess, being the Blue Hydrogen Hub at the Isle of Grain in the UK, but I've also worked on a wide variety of projects in Australia, but I'm based in Singapore, and so actually hydrogen production is unlikely to occur in Singapore, and therefore it becomes a hydrogen demand hub. So a production hub needs some specific building blocks, and we've heard a little bit of that from Joe and Alana. Obviously, it needs an offtake, and we'll come to that a little bit as we go through, but it's absolutely fundamental, and it's the current stumbling block, right? Hydrogen is expensive, so no one is producing off or procuring offtake agreements, so the price of hydrogen remains high. And to change that, like we did with renewables, we're going to need some sort of incentive, which Joe talked about is starting to be set up. That requires regulation. I think policy might be in place in some places, but regulation and actual concrete incentive is needed. Some are nearly there. The UK has a framework for offtake. It's going to be a CFD type mechanism, it looks like, and the US, of course, has the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, whose tax credits effectively half the price of hydrogen. But even then, there are a few more steps that we need to take. Of course, as we've heard, you need to produce hydrogen. So there's work in hydrogen production and the renewable energy associated with that. When you hear about the efficiency of your electrolyzers and hydrogen production, don't forget you've also got to extract water and desalinate it in many cases. So the pure electrolyzer efficiency won't be the efficiency of your hydrogen production. And then, of course, you need a mechanism to get your hydrogen exported and or imported. With hydrogen demand hubs, of course, you outsource the production, but all the other elements you actually still need in place. And before you can do that, you really need some of the soft infrastructure to be in place. So you need a supply chain, you need safety regulations, you need R&D in your country for how you actually use hydrogen, how it fits in with your current supply and demand vehicles, if you like, and then you need the policy and regulation to be in place. And that can only really come from some sort of coordinated approach, and that requires both the public sector, governments, whether that's federal, state or local, to really look at how they might fund hubs, and then obviously private sector developers in most cases are going to be the delivery mechanism for hydrogen. And only then do you get some of the infrastructure that happens further down the line. And that really requires some careful thinking about. We produced this 2035 pathway for the UK, looking at all the different parts of the ecosystem that you need to put in place in order to get some sort of demand hub, but also a supply hub in place. So if I talk to you about Singapore, and I guess in many ways the same applies to Hong Kong, we have a gas network, and that has 50% hydrogen in it already, though it's grey hydrogen, but they're also geographically isolated in some senses, and they can't produce all of their own renewable energy or hydrogen. So we've got to look at all three parts of the supply chain, and really, if you're going to import hydrogen, you have to think about what the costs are in order to be able to make up that cost. So if you have 100% renewable electricity and your efficiency is somewhere around 60 or 70%, don't forget the cost of that water, and then you convert it into a shippable fuel, and then you ship it, and you lose some energy in liquefied hydrogen when you ship, and then you deconvert it, you end up with somewhere like 20% of the energy that you had to start with, which means even if you've got really cheap renewable energy, it's 5 times the cost, the hydrogen. So you have to think about that, and you have to think about that for all the potential carriers. And you have to think about what the impact of that will be in your hydrogen hub and what you really need. Do you need liquefied hydrogen because you are aiming at aviation, or do you need ammonia because perhaps you can directly fire ammonia into a power station? And just bear in mind that what you can't do is import liquefied hydrogen, or you can't import ammonia and then crack it into hydrogen and then liquefy it for aviation, because you end up with less energy than you started with. So the UK has been on a bit of a mission thinking about how it might decarbonize, and we have now come to the point that the key thing that's going to be needed is some sort of supply incentive that enables that. And I guess the IRA has done the same thing. There is that production model. And, you know, it is possible to create the demand even where you thought there wasn't. Almost all the gas networks in the world globally used to run on hydrogen. Singapore and Hong Kong still do. It is possible to convert them back, but it does take effort and it does take time. So the next question is, what do you do instead? Is it transport? Is it aviation? Is it shipping? I guess the key thing is to think about, for your specific country, what is really needed and for your particular situation. And then I think the conclusion is that, you know, hydrogen, you know, it's part of the solution, but it's not a silver bullet. Yeah, it's expensive. So we should only use it where other solutions don't work. Use that renewable electricity first. But if you are going to use it, and there are places where you will need to use it, hydrogen is going to need incentivizing. And only then can you produce a production hub. And once you get that incentive in place, then you start to get the demand. And in fact, only then do the hydrogen production hubs start booming, because that's the only way they can get funding, is if that we have a demand for it. So in order to do that, you have to think about your supply chain and you have to develop your strategy for each country very carefully. Thanks very much. Back to you, David.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And our final speaker, I believe, is Zhu Yan, standing in for Dr. Deng. Dr. Deng Fei has a PhD from Tsinghua University and is a senior consultant of hydrogen production expert group of the International Hydrogen Energy Center and chief technology officer of Shuimu Mental Hydrogen Energy Technology Company. Dr. Deng's experience includes professional research and development covering hydrogen production from renewable energy direct coupling hydrogen production, co-production with carbon-free fuel operation. And Zhu Yan is going to present on the topic of the hydrogen industrial layout in China. Thank you.
Hi, David, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you and
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, hello everyone. Glad to join today's and here's my topic. And I want to demonstrate the IHEC, International Hydrogen Energy Center and Hydrogen Industry Layout to everybody. And just quick introduce what is the IHEC, who we are. Actually, we are founded by 3 counterparties, jointly established by the Beijing municipal government and the United Nations Industry Development Organization and the Tsinghua Industrial R&D Institute. And this is a global hydrogen energy innovation platform awarded by the UNIDO, United Nations Industry Development Organization. Actually, our core, the final goal is to build the global hydrogen industry hub. And on July 7, 2021, the IHEC International Hydrogen Energy Center was officially unveiled at Beijing, and our headquarters is in Beijing. So this is our for IHEC. And some background for the China government's policy for the environmental. China committed to the international community to reduce carbon emissions since 2009. And the carbon neutral is a top-level design of the national strategy, which impacts the China's economic structure, energy security, and international relationships. Actually, just a quick quick demonstrate the history for that. And China has made a carbon reduction commitment to the international community since 2009 and has so far exceeded its target. And as the 2050 Paris Climate Conference, China further proposed a quantitative carbon emission target. And on 2021 Glasgow conference to further enhance Paris pledge to reduce emission. Actually, the final is the whole picture for the Chinese government commitment. And we try to achieve the goal on 2016 to catch the carbon neutral. And the country launched a series of policy and system to fully demonstrate the strength and determination of achieve the carbon neutral goal. And from three kind of layers. First one is a national strategy planning and the policy system and the social co-building initiative. So this is a whole picture for your reference. And in the whole country, actually, we major focus on the four major pathway. One is for electricity decarbonization and the terminal electrification and energy saving improvement efficiency and the green emission. And in different paths, and it has a different strategy and different goal to meet our, the target for the carbon neutral in the future. And the full pathway cannot achieve the final goals based on our research. For example, here, this is our current, the situation. And if we do not do nothing, the policy and take action, we cannot achieve a goal. But if you follow the current situation, for example, to learn from the Europe, to just add the text, and still cannot achieve the goal. So actually in China, we just follow the step. Technology and the carbon pricing is a balanced way to achieve the the final goal for the carbon neutral. And this is very clear. And here for IHEC, we believe green and carbon-free fuel represented by the green hydrogen and the green ammonia are the important pathway to energy transmission and the carbon emission reduction, and have a wide range of integration application scenario. Here is our, the estimate in the 2015 for the full path, which we listed above: electricity, building, transportation, and industry. This is current, the policy background, just as a reference for everybody. And now I demonstrate the IHEC, what we have done already, and what the technology and experience we had. Actually, for the whole hydrogen chain line, we major focus on all of the, the industry chain. For example, from the starting, renewable energy and hydrogen production. We adopt the, the renewable energies such as wind, solar, the hydropower to, electrolyze the water into the hydrogen, or use such a different method, and to try to generate the green hydrogen. And then we also have the technology to transport and the hydrogen into the application side. And for example, short distance transportation, and we can adopt, the high pressure, gas hydrogen, or the liquid hydrogen, and for the long distance transportation. And now we try to build, the hydrogen pipeline and maybe the ammonia storage container, and more located on the in the port, and we try to transport it into the all sides of the country. And for the application part, and we have the hydrogen energy supply, hydrogen power, and the hydrogen raw material. And we try to use four kind of the area to build a zero carbon industry. This is our current and incubate enterprise, and we already done here. And one of the company called Shanghai Yitong, and is the electrolyzer production company. And then we also have the Shenli Keji, who is more focused on the fuel cell stack and the composite bipolar plate. And we also have the Yihua Tong, which is a listed company in Hong Kong, and is focused on hydrogen fuel cell power system. And we also have the the mature company called Shuimu Tongda, is well operated in China, more focused on the transportation system and the car operation service. And for the production side, and we already have two kind of company. One called is Shuimu Minto. It's more focused on the green hydrogen production. And the Binghua Gufen is for the by-production hydrogen. And this kind of hyper companies, hybrid, is more focused on the the storage and the transportation, special for the hydrogen fuel infrastructure. And this is our whole picture for the hydrogen industry chain in China. And currently we have 4 kind of demonstration zone. First one is in our headquarters, Beijing Haidian. And the second one is in Beijing Daxing. It's focused on the logistic vehicle and the fuel cell R&D. And the third one is in Hebei, Zhangjiakou. It's more focused on the commercial vehicles. And currently we still have the green hydrogen and ammonia production here. And the last one is in Inner Mongolia, Barlow. Is have 3 kind of industry: metallurgical and chemical, and the green hydrogen and ammonia production. And currently we focus on the the north of China, and the Barlow, the position is for the commercial demonstration based. And the strength is we have the huge renewable energy and industrial base. And we more focus on the hydrogen production, hydrogen storage and transportation, hydrogen power, and hydrogen raw material in Barlow. And Zhangjiakou is another key, the demonstration center for us. And we major on here is to do the hydrogen production, hydrogen storage, transportation, and hydrogen energy supply, hydrogen power, and hydrogen raw material here. And in Beijing, and our headquarters here, and the Beijing, we major focus on R&D and the talent, technology, innovation. As some more details for our demonstration standard, and the Barlow is the comprehensive application demonstration zone of national renewable energy, has all of the annuals required for the development of hydrogen energy, and has a good foundation for build a green industry system. In here, we have the wind resource gathering together is the first class wind field. And we still have, the mineral resource island material area. I mean, the area rare earth here. And we still have the huge manufacturing cluster here. So Barlow is one of the few regions in the world that has both the cost advantage of hydrogen production from renewable energy and the industrial base of relation industries. And we built a plant here, and this is our, the capacity in Barlow. And we built a large-scale renewable energy internet demonstrate and the 5 gigawatt. And we try to generate, the green hydrogen, and the 300,000 tons hydrogen per year. And for the green metallurgy for large-scale commercial operation, we try to build 1.1 million tons of the DRI, and 800 tons of ferritic stainless steel. And we also have the 1.2 million tons of green ammonia per year in Barlow. And in Zhangjiakou, we major focus on the 3 kind of areas. One is the large-scale renewable energy microgrid. Another one is the large-scale off-grid renewable energy hydrogen production. The last one is a large-scale green hydrogen synthesis of ammonia. And it's all of, it's a start to plan and the build. And here, we still have the full picture for our final product. One is for the hydrogen power and the hydrogen energy supply and the hydrogen raw material and hydrogen fuel stock. And here we still try to build the port in the Hebei province and to store our ammonia and hydrogen, and we can rely on the port and transport the hydrogen or the ammonia into other country. So this is the whole things. And this final one to introduce our the final one in Beijing Daxing Industry Hydrogen Energy Demonstration Zone. And we already on board lots of company into our demonstration zone. And during the 2020 Beijing Winter Olympic Game, we already served over 2,000 hydrogen bus in Olympic game. And our hydrogen refuel station is running very success. And this is all of the Beijing Daxing International Hydrogen Energy Zone. Thank you. And here we try to invite all of the international companies, government to visit us in Beijing, and to help us achieve the final goal and build the world hydrogen value chain. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Zhuyan. Very interesting presentation. Now we'll move on to the Q&A session. And we have quite a number of questions from the audience yesterday, so we'll go through them in order. We are due to finish at 6 p.m. Hong Kong time, but we'll carry on as long as people want to listen to the questions. So without further ado, I'll start with the first one. This is from the PBEC CEO in Hong Kong. A question for Alana. It's a bit of a long question, Alana. Sorry for this. Toowoomba, South Queensland, the development by the Wagner family are also promoting its hydrogen cluster, supported by NERA and Queensland government, and are building out the community similarly and airport. What would you say are the key differences between the two clusters, and is there any collaboration, or are they regarded as direct competitors?
Okay, so a couple of things to note. In Australia, there are different terminologies used for different government funding programs. There is a Hydrogen Hubs funding program, which has recently been announced, awarding $70 million to collaborators in various regions, and that's $70 million per region. There is also the NERA clusters. Now, that was an attempt by the government a few years ago to get smaller technology providers to basically to the table to come and discuss things, and that was supported by $100,000 per cluster. So that's not exactly a significant amount of money to get things rolling. In the talk that I had a little bit earlier on in today's program, that was more focused on the concept of a hub of collaborating partners, and there's certainly that happening in Gladstone. That sits a little bit outside of the Hydrogen Hubs funding program. But coming back to the question about the cluster in Toowoomba, Toowoomba is 125 kilometres west of Brisbane. Gladstone is 530 kilometres north of Brisbane. We're talking about two completely different ports for export projects and two completely different regions. Wonderfully, Queensland is a very large space, very large area. So we're not talking about competition. We're talking about being neighbours, and we're talking potentially about collaboration in other areas such as technology usage and trying not to reinvent the wheel. So I'm not too close to the Toowoomba cluster and the work that they're doing, but I do know that they're very well supported by the Queensland government, as is there's also a cluster in Gladstone too. and also one in Townsville and I believe Mackay as well. So I hope that helps answer your question about the differences and actually just give a little bit more clarity around the cluster program and the hydrogen hubs funding program, and then conceptually a little bit more about hubs that we're talking about today.
Thanks, Alana. Next question is from Andrew Kinlock for Joe. How much will your CapEx cost be, and how will it be financed?
Yeah, so for our first plant, which is 350 megawatts, we estimate just over £400 million. We are currently in the market with EPC bidders on that. So we've selected technology. The one thing that's, maybe this is unique to the UK, but UK construction elements are very hard to get fixed prices for. What I would say is our second plant is twice the size, so 700 megawatts, and a similar capex cost because of both the economies of scale plus shared infrastructure. So the total cost is just under £1 billion, which we understand is comparable with most of the other large blue hydrogen projects globally. Obviously, difficult environment with EPC and cost inflation, but that's pretty much the capex budget. Maybe the last thing to say is we are not responsible for the CO2 infrastructure, the TNS, which is separate capex. We are not responsible for the major hydrogen pipelines, which is being run by Cadent, which is a Macquarie company, which is separate to us. So this is really just for our production plant, and goes to the point earlier, which is hydrogen's expensive. We know what the cheapest form of energy is. It's gas and coal. Like in the reality, that's the practical reality. Now we have to change it for obvious reasons that it's just killing the planet. But we shouldn't pretend that the alternative is cheaper. It's just not. Taking gas, we are replacing gas. People that use gas, changing to low carbon hydrogen, it's more expensive to do that, but a necessity. So last thing I'll say on this is the government runs a very careful process to make sure that we're endlessly in competition, and we have to demonstrate that, and actually, I think Arup are advising government on some of this, so we're keeping our feet to the fire, it's fair to say, to make sure that every last cost is very carefully accounted for, and every element of the cost has to be highly competitively auctioned or tendered, sorry.
And can you speak to financing, Joe?
So yeah, and financing, we are looking to finance it 70% with project finance, which is interesting because it'll be one of the first large project finance areas. We have lots of interest from the usual suspects in global banking. There are some unusual aspects of hydrogen, which I think make financing a bit more challenging. The biggest one has been alluded to earlier, which is where is the hydrogen ready demand? If your first off-taker disappears, what do you do next with all this hydrogen? So there are some unique challenges, I think, regarding the regulatory framework and others, but financing, we expect to get 70% of it from project finance debt.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Next question is from in the room, Danny Kui Alberman. For the blue hydrogen project, why not simply burn coal with carbon capture? Any of the panelists like to answer that?
Well, I can answer that easily in the UK, which is the UK doesn't really burn coal at all anymore, practically speaking. So we are, all our big industrial companies use natural gas. And so for us, it's very simple, which is natural gas replaced coal in the UK because it was cheaper. Nothing to do with the environment. It was just really cheap because we have it in large quantities. So for us, it's very simple. And all our customers currently take natural gas. So it's a relatively easy fuel switch for them. Not always easy, depends on the type of business they have. But most of the customers for using energy for power and heat, relatively simple switch to switch natural gas to hydrogen. And they're also maintain dual fuel, because one of the issues with hydrogen is we're not going to be as resilient as the current energy system. We only have 1 or 2 plants. Our plants will trip. So these big industrial companies, they need to keep going 24/7. They'll switch back to gas. But for us, it wasn't really aside from the fact that coal is a difficult word to use in the UK, everyone uses gas currently. And the process to reform gas into low carbon hydrogen. So we capture 97 to 99% of the CO2. And that is a well-established technology and process. So is relatively easily understood by government, banks, and other stakeholders.
And just to add to that, of course, carbon capture post-combustion is much more difficult, and you don't get anything like that same capture rate. And it's actually also relatively expensive to retrofit. So it's actually better to take the CO2 out first and then just use the hydrogen directly.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. Next question is from John Pemberton, also for Joe, I'm afraid. Sorry, Joe. Regarding the CO2 capture, taking, say, 350 megawatts of hydrogen from 2026, how long does it take to fill up the available nearby sinks for the CO2 that are planned to service the hydrogen production, and how secure are these in terms of containment long term?
Good question. So in terms of the capacity, the E&I store on an annual basis can take about 10 million tons of CO2 per annum. For us at Vertex, with both our plants, which is about 1 gigawatt of hydrogen, is about nearly 20% of that store. There are 4 other industrial carbon post-combustion sort of capture plants in the region that are also using that store. So in total, it's about 2.5 million tons per annum, about 25% in the initial phase is being taken up. It will take many decades for that to fill. The UK is blessed with enormous offshore end of life for old gas fields. And so what they'll do when they fill that storage, there's another one further along the coast and they'll just keep filling it. But I think between UK and Norway, we have virtually we could store the entire CO2 emissions of Europe. So remember, UK has very large scale offshore gas fields at end of life that are very good for storage. In terms of a really big question, which is, well, will it actually keep the CO2 in? There's a very long answer to that. I think the very simplistic desktop type answer is that field contained CO2 in the form of methane gas for, gazillions of years. And this particular gas field has been operated by E&I for a long time, who know it very well. The prevailing view, certainly in the UK, is this type of field is the best type to store CO2. There are others which are more complex. So the technology is known how to do it. What I'd say I think is unknown is towards the end of the CO2 storage life, as it comes under pressure, how will that change and evolve? And that's really been dealt with, led by the UK government, its advisors, and E&I. But they are putting substantial amounts of capital and others into it, with a very firm belief that this geological formation held gas for trillions of years before we drilled a hole in the cap. And we're just reversing that flow, and therefore a very strong belief that it will securely hold the CO2 in perpetuity.
Great, thanks, Joe, again. So we're at 6 o'clock now. We still have a very large number of participants online, so we'll continue with the Q&A. The next question is from Peter Thompson, Arup, to Thomas and others. How can Hong Kong or Singapore go about establishing a hydrogen economy?
I mean, I'll have a go at that and then let others perhaps chip in. I mean, I would say the big thing that's going to get Alana's project off the ground and what's going to get Joe's project off the ground is going to be a demand, right? And to create a demand, we need some sort of incentive. And you can do that in 2 ways. You can either force people to use hydrogen, or you can give them such an incentive that it's cheaper than the others. And in fact, with and that's exactly what happened with renewables. And of course, solar panels started on spaceships and were ridiculously expensive, and now they're ridiculously cheap. So you have to start with that mechanism. Both mechanisms were used. So the UK, as an example, had a requirement for 1% renewable energy increase every year to be supplied by all electricity suppliers, and you had to buy a certain amount, and that just certainly increased over time. We also had a feed-in tariff which gave you an incentive. So I think at its heart, those are the 2 things. Someone has to demand it. The way in which you demand it is you either require it, or you provide a as a subsidy to provide it. Any thoughts, Joe or Alana?
Just touching on that as well, Singapore is already well advanced in helping with the demand side of things. There's two areas that we're working on at the moment. One is for electricity supply, so using ammonia as the energy carrier, and we're looking into what ammonia cracking would look like in Singapore to be able to use it as an energy. As an electricity feedstock, and then the other thing we're looking at is ammonia bunkering as a maritime fuel. So we're working with the Mercer Zero Carbon Shipping Centre, which is based in Copenhagen, and I was delighted to be there on Friday yet again. I highly recommend Copenhagen to anyone. And they definitely see that ammonia is going to be the longer term zero carbon fuel compared to ethanol, which is much more difficult to scale for the maritime industry. But with Singapore being obviously 30% of the worldwide bunkering fuel going through Singapore, it's a wonderful hub for that, and that's the off-take piece that's going to be really critical to getting not just my project, but many other projects around the world off the ground.
Okay, thanks, Alana. Next question is from Jeremy Fuller from Arup. For the UK blue hydrogen project, I guess it's for Joe again. Did you consider the corresponding increase in natural gas demand compared to using natural gas directly without conversion in the local industry? Is it a major impact?
Not really. I mean, you know, we're supplying people that already use. Well, I guess so we should just be clear that industrial customers vary quite a lot, right? Some of them use hydrogen for heat and power, which is relatively straightforward to low capex, low risk. Some of them use them in complicated processes, and they use 24/7 significant amount of heat. So it is a bit of a mix. In terms of the overall gas implications, I mean, these guys are using natural gas already. And so the two choices are they can't electrify. So they either shut down and they don't make products that we all want to use, or it moves somewhere else, or they use low carbon hydrogen. So it won't really impact the volumes of natural gas. There is a small conversion factor because we need slightly more natural gas on an energy basis than we deliver as hydrogen, but it's relatively minor. And overall, I think the most recent analysis shows that about half of the existing regional natural gas could be switched to low carbon hydrogen. So that's sort of order of magnitude, but we're not impacting gas demand. These are big industrial customers that use gas day in, day out and don't have an alternative.
Okay, thanks, Joe. From Lung Kai Power Assets Holdings, regarding carbon emissions reduction and green hydrogen, is there any new technology coming on the market as an alternative to wind and solar? And the same question for blue hydrogen and gas. Any substitution for carbon capture?
I can maybe throw in a couple of things on that. I mean, because we are actively looking. I guess there are some technologies that can make blue hydrogen without having a byproduct of CO2 in gas form, but having byproduct in the form of graphite. And that's quite interesting because blue hydrogen at the moment has to be made. So we know blue hydrogen is very scalable. We know how to make it. It's relatively easy, but you're tied to a CO2 store, which has a lot of cost and then means you can't build it anywhere. So there are some technologies emerging that have a different byproduct than CO2 in gas form, which may be very helpful, particularly for things like stranded steel mills, which are very hard to decarbonize. So on that front, I think absolutely yes. I mean, green hydrogen by definition is very clean, just depends on your power source. Certainly in the UK, at some point that will be linked more directly to offshore wind, but there is a lot of thought and studies about using nuclear as a source of energy, certainly for green hydrogen as a potential alternative. But I mean, green hydrogen is as clean as it's going to get in the production process. Like I say, it's just a function of where your source of energy is and how you make sure that is clean, and that also you're not cannibalizing green energy that can just go and decarbonize the grid today. So that'd be my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I would see I would see that hydrogen is the new technology that enables large-scale wind, large-scale solar to make really deep penetrations into the grid, because they are both intermittent. They're relatively predictable. I mean, the sun gets up at a very predictable time of day and goes to sleep at a very predictable time of day. Clouds are a little bit different. And wind, you can forecast a day or two out, perhaps. So I think, if you're looking for new renewable technologies, maybe offshore floating wind with hydrogen production at sea. And then you can also almost imagine remote bunkering. So there's some interesting questions about how that might work. I think in terms of carbon capture, the one thing that we really do have to continue to think about is, of course, it's a mechanism, a mechanism for the oil and gas companies to continue their midstream, upstream, and downstream businesses, and therefore something that they can get behind and will help them move. And so blue hydrogen not only is cheaper, but it also gets a kind of broader backing. That means decarbonisation may happen quicker, because if we can mobilise their considerable assets and wealth, that will help. Finally, I would say, the one trouble with blue hydrogen is, of course, it's a little bit like nuclear in the case that no company can really guarantee holding on to anything in perpetuity. Only a government can do that, and so it's like nuclear waste, right? So that's why a lot of these carbon capture projects need government funding at the back, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means it's different.
Su-Yan, did you have any perspective from China on that question?
Yes, I agree, but I just want to clarify what the purpose for the hydrogen. Actually, the technology is only to fulfill our purpose. To consider hydrogen as the energy, and we use the hydrogen as energy, and we think, storage energy is a good purpose for hydrogen. Why we use the renewable energy to generate it to the hydrogen? The case is the renewable energy cannot be stored, and we waste every day. So that's why we try to use the renewable energy, generate to the hydrogen. This is the major purpose. But consider, you try to see the new technology for the blue hydrogen. If you consider the industry side, you treat hydrogen as a material, and the industry requests hydrogen, and there's another story. But if you want to, use hydrogen as, the energy, and you adopt the blue hydrogen as energy. But my question is, you can direct use the fossil energy. No need to, transfer the gas, the LNG or coal or fossil energy into the hydrogen. It's a waste of time and a waste of money. Yeah, this is my answer.
Okay, thank you, Su-Yan. The next question is from Patrick Cooper of Arup for Alana. Regarding the Gladstone project, what are the targeted industries and off-takers for that project?
So generally in Gladstone, there's a number of different industries. We have cement manufacturing, there is explosive and fertilizer manufacturing, and large alumina refinery and smelter. So already there's some key offtakes that we're talking about there, as well as the port itself, with zero carbon shipping on its way, We're looking to potentially have some bunkering in the region as well as obviously moving off into exports. So Sumitomo has actually partnered with Rio Tinto on the alumina refinery, and looking at replacing natural gas with hydrogen in the calcination process in the refining, and that is a potentially very large offtake. So we're piloting a trial of that at the moment. Shortly we will be. And some of the other players in the region have already signed MOUs with Orica for the explosive and fertilizer manufacturing. And Cement Australia, I believe, is still looking for an appropriate solution for decarbonisation, because as I believe Joe said earlier, hydrogen is not the silver bullet.
It's not the only decarbonisation solution, and I believe they're going to need a range of different things to make it cost effective and make it work. But in the early piece here, that's certainly what we're seeing is the main industrial offtakes. And in Australia, the conversation very much is around the export piece. You know, where are we going to be exporting our hydrogen energy to? Because obviously we're a large fossil fuel exporter. Now, our approach is that certainly we believe export is a key market that we're going to be targeting, but we believe that the domestic market should be first. With the industrial associations we have in Gladstone, it's a really great opportunity to do that. It's a good spot to produce, to use already, and then to export.
Very good. Thank you, Alana. Well, we're going to have to wrap up soon. I'm going to take one more question from the field, and we'll somehow try to find a way to get answers to participants of the many questions that we didn't get to. But so the last question is from Richard Colwell of Intercontinental Energy, and this is for all of the panel members. So you can go, we'll go round robin. Do the panel believe domestic heating is a valuable use case for hydrogen? Just go around, Tom.
I can go on that one first. I think when you look at the basic physics of doing it and the cost of doing it, it doesn't seem to make much sense. However, and here's the key thing, there are some networks that pre-exist in various different countries around the world. If you take the UK, the gas network is pretty ubiquitous. And we want to keep that gas network in order to be able to run backup generation and storage for hydrogen when these things behind me aren't blowing. So we need a gas network, and we need a healthy gas network that's cost effective. Because the gas network goes into everyone's home, and it already exists, and the peak heating demand in the UK is 6 times the peak electrical demand, the conversion towards 100% electricity becomes quite challenging. And the same sort of applies to Hong Kong and Singapore. For different reasons, we have a hydrogen network already in place, and it goes into everyone's home. And here I'm talking about hot water heating, obviously not space heating, but also cooking. It kind of makes sense. But if you start with a blank sheet of paper, the answer is quite different. And the answer in Australia is also a little bit different, because the distances and the density is very different. And already the cost of natural gas in Australia is beginning to lose out to the cost of electrification. So I think it's very country specific, and it depends what you start with.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. Joe?
Yeah, look, similar. Look, it just depends on where you live and what the conditions are. If you are in sunny Spain in a small landlocked village, it's inconceivable really that hydrogen as a major form is going to make sense. You're going to use renewables principally. If you live in the UK or Northern Europe and you already have a huge hydrogen hub next door to your house, it may make a lot of sense. And so it depends on like anything today in the UK, many homes in rural areas use oil-fired central heating, even though it's expensive and nasty because it didn't make sense to connect them to gas. And so I think with hydrogen and some of these solutions, we should avoid too much silver bullet, single solution options. If you live in central London, most likely you'll just use electricity. You shouldn't have gas at all. And other areas will need hydrogen. So I think there will be a role for hydrogen, whether it's as a transition or in certain locations. But I think prevailing wisdom is principally if you can electrify and use renewables and nuclear, that is the big sustainable win. And I do believe that's true for certainly most parts of the UK and much of Europe, that electrification supported by those renewables and nuclear will be the main source of energy for people's homes. And hydrogen, if it is used, will either be that transition piece as blending or something else to get us going, or in very specific geographies and locations.
Thanks, Joe. Su-Yan, any comment?
Yes, again, consider the purpose again. And for example, if a domestic heat in China and in some kind of area, we can direct use about that. And I don't think it's any value to transfer, domestic heat into the hydrogen. But and in some kind of area, if you fan the waste of the domestic heat, and we can transfer to the heat into the different kind of, the energy. But hydrogen is one of, the method, I think, and all depends on the, the technology and the cost. This is my answer.
Okay, and last but not least, Alana, you don't need much heating in Australia, but
well, I mean, in Brisbane, generally not. It's nice and warm up here. Although I will say our friends down in Victoria can get quite chilly, so they might disagree with me. They're actually more. They've got a higher domestic usage of gas compared to the other states, I have to say. One thing I think that needs to be acknowledged in the debate about decarbonising gas networks, because that's exactly what we're talking about here. From the domestic customer's point of view, we've got to be careful not to take away the choice from the customer. So by ensuring that by having a pro-electrification debate on all points, what you're doing is making sure that the customer doesn't have a choice anymore about whether they want gas cooking, which could be solely supplied by hydrogen, or gas hot water or heating if that's what they have in their home. And there are different merits to each, whether it's electrified or whether it's gas powered. So we do need to make sure that we're giving the customer the ability to choose in that respect. My other point to make is that if the gas networks want to start to try and decarbonise, even if they're only blending 10% or 20% into their networks, I don't see a reason why we should stop them. Any step that we take towards decarbonisation is absolutely essential. Gas is going to play a big role in this transition as we move forward. Electrification absolutely is an option, but if there are steps we can take now, we should be taking them, and we are seeing that action happening here in Australia already. Some trials on the way in the gas networks for domestic and also business users, and I applaud the courage of those companies to come out and do that.
Great, thank you, Alana. Well, that wraps up this webinar for today. It remains for me to thank very much the panel members. Very lively discussion and excellent presentations, and the IPPF Secretariat for organising this. And I'll hand back to Joel Lakin for some closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, and the panel for a really interesting run through where we've had interesting discussions with experts from Australia, from China, from the UK, and we're Hong Kong, and we're delighted to have had you all on board. Thank you for the people that have zoomed in, and to our very hardworking co-chairperson who been steering this committee, Mr. Thomas Briault of Arup. And thank you all for joining us today. That's a wrap, chap. And one more small detail, thanks very much again to Arup. And for those few and hearty few that are here in Hong Kong enjoying Arup's hospitality, the buffet is now open. Thank you so much for coming.
And also to Hasco for co-sponsoring this.